the last example, or the last type I want to discuss, is this idea of it's within the category of expansion parallelisms, but it's this one where the idea is intensified. Here's an example from Psalm 9:6. The author starts off introduces this idea of the enemy has come to an end in perpetual ruin. So the enemy is destroyed, essentially. But he goes on to intensify it. The next line is, "And you have uprooted the cities." So it goes from just being perpetually ruined to the city is being completely uprooted or pulled out. And it goes on to intensify even more, where the very memory of them has perished. So it's this intensifying idea as the lines progress. Again, you don't see these a ton, but it's good when you're reading to keep an eye out for these categories. So just to recap, we've got let's bring it up here, but you've got these different types of parallelisms. The first are interchangeable. We talked about there's the echo, there's the antithesis, and then in between those there's that contrast. And those lines are interchangeable and refining each other in one of those three ways. Another type, the second category, is these qualifying, where the second line gives the purpose, the time, or in some other way qualifies the idea of the first line. And then finally, you've got these expansion parallelisms, which can get really, really interesting and kind of complex. First, we talked about the continuation, where the idea has begun and then continues on. Sometimes there's this visual progression. We talked about that psalm, Psalm 5, where it starts talking about the stomach being death, and then the throat being a grave, and then the tongue being slippery. So there's kind of this visual progression or linear progression there. There's also the intensifying, where he begins with the idea and then intensifies on it. So anyway, these are the different kinds of parallelisms there are. And just finally, just one last warning: when you're reading poetry, it's more important to see the imagery than it is to classify it. So let's say you're looking at a parallel expansion, and you notice that the author is doing this thing where he starts off with the stomach being death, and then the throat being open grave, and then the tongue being slippery. It's more important that you know that idea, that you understand what the author is doing, than it is to classify it. So don't necessarily waste time trying to decide whether it's a parallelism of expansion or continuation or intensification. Just know what the author is doing, and that's good enough. These categories are sometimes debated even among scholars, so I don't suggest you really waste too much time worrying about these categories. Remember, it's an art, it's an artistic expression. So get the message, and then really get an idea of how the author's communicating, and then appreciate it. Ultimately, it really is art to be appreciated.